And we had a little girl who had been horrendously abused by a gang over a period of years, given an overdose of drugs, and she died. And I was asked to go and join a very small team looking at a job that became known as Operation Augusta. In that time, we'd identified 97 child rapists. We had over 36 children that we'd identified, all of those living in care homes, being raped daily. Some had been made pregnant. One of those victims was made pregnant by a 43-year-old married Pakistani Muslim man, father of 3. He made this little girl, she was just 13, pregnant. He'd been abusing her from the age of 12. The fetus had been seized without her knowledge, consent. I was actually threatened with prison.
Who made those threats?
A very, very senior police officer. My husband was terminally ill. I went off work. That job had gone to the major incident team. I came back to work after my husband died. That job had been buried. Not one of those men was charged with any kind of sexual offences, and I could not get my head around it. It was horrific.
Maggie, for people that don't know you from the headlines, how do you describe what you do today?
Hard work. It's probably the best answer. Donkey work, actually. But what I'm trying to do is to raise awareness about the systemic failures that I have seen, not only in policing, but in the whole of the criminal justice system. I've learned that primarily through my work in fighting for and supporting victims and survivors of sexual abuse, including, as most people know me for, victims of grooming gangs, so-called grooming gangs. So that's my aim, to highlight corruption, to show the failures, to give victims and survivors a platform in an attempt to push for change. Alongside that, I started my own charity called the Maggie Oliver Foundation, and that is intended to give each of those individual victims and survivors somewhere to go where they can be supported either through our emotional support service or through our advocacy service, which helps individuals to challenge the system when they are being failed. And those cases we quite often take to the media if we are unable to progress them in a way that we feel is the right way, if that gives you an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good overview. But before the campaign in the books, the foundation, you were a police officer, weren't you? Could you take us back to where it all began?
Oh, it's a long story. So it will be very much a whistle-stop tour. But for anybody who wants to know more, I wrote my own book called Survivors by Maggie Oliver, and you can get that on Amazon or wherever. But very briefly, I didn't join the police until I was 42. I'm getting on in years now, but I've put a lot in my life. Before that, I was married. I met my husband at 20. I got married. We had 4 children. I did a lot of traveling before I got married. I spoke French, German, Spanish, English. Then I started to have my own children. I say I've got 4, 3 boys and a girl. And I spent maybe altogether about 10 years at home, maybe not 10, maybe 8 years at home with them, just doing an odd part-time job here and there. Went back to university when I was 38 to do a full-time honours degree, humanities, wanting to teach, because I'm not somebody who can just twiddle my thumbs, and I wanted something that would take me right through to my retirement. So originally I thought teaching, and then in my final year at uni, I thought, if I don't get into my teacher training, what can I do? What would interest me? What would give me a variety of different opportunities in one career? And I thought, I know, I'll apply to the police. Don't ask me why. Maybe this was written in the stars for me. I don't know. But I applied to GMP, to Greater Manchester Police, applied to teacher training, got in both, decided to give the cops a whirl for a year. And if I didn't like it after that, I would go into teaching. So, actually my 42nd birthday, when I swore my oath of attestation at Sedgley Park in Manchester, all dressed up in my new uniform, brightly polished shoes, and really hopeful about the future and wanting to make a difference. And for my sins and to my complete shock, I was posted to Mossad. For a 42-year-old woman who brought up 4 kids, lived in, a normal community, I thought that they'd chosen the wrong person and they'd give me the wrong location. I thought they'd send me to a nice leafy little suburb and I could be a schools officer or something, or a community officer. Instead, I'm straight in the thick of Mossad. And back then in the 90s, it was, guns and gangs and drugs. And we had all the universities, we had the Curry Mile. It was a complete mix of communities and people that I had got no experience of. And I was in complete shock. And I'm not going to lie, Paul, there I am, a 42-year-old woman, having to do the bleep test, having to do, public order training, having to put my riot gear on and, do 6:00 morning runs. It was challenging for me. I'd never done anything like it. And, there were many moments in my probation where I almost walked away. There were a lot of men my age, as you know, who were, ex-forces had come out the army and the RAF, and they brought the pensions into the cops, a disciplined, uniformed service. I'm a woman who's got a very overdeveloped sense of what's right and wrong. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help people. And even though I never wanted to be in uniform, in all honesty, I wanted to work initially in child protection. That was where I wanted to go. And I had a rough ride in my probation. I'm not going to lie, I was really badly bullied by my line manager. He was not a nice person. He made my life hell. But
in terms of how would he do that?
I think before he even met me, Paul, he'd got it in his mind that I'm middle-aged, middle class, do-gooder, shouldn't be in the cops, and most definitely shouldn't be in Mossad.
So chauvinistic, really?
Absolutely chauvinistic, misogynistic, made my life hell before he even met me. And am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah, go on.
I did my training at Bruges. It was in the days when Bruges was still open, and you'd do your 6 months. You'd come back for your first period in company with a tutor. I had a tutor who was, good guy, loved going to postmortems in the mortuary. I think he had a bit of a thing about the nurses there, but we had a laugh, and and I felt I was really doing really well. But this sergeant did not like me from the day I arrived. And what he decided was, when I came back for my next period in company, he was going to give me to a guy who I loved to pieces, by the way. But that guy never wanted to be a tutor. He didn't want somebody like me hanging around his neck, holding him back. He was an ex-paratrooper. He was like gung-ho, right in all the thick of it. And I'm slowing him down. So my sergeant made him my tutor in order to develop him so he would get better at paperwork. And I was sort of left on my own a lot of the time. But the first time I met my second tutor, we're driving through the gates of the Nick, and my new tutor's coming the other way. First time I'd ever met him. And my first tutor said, "Oh, no, I won't use his name. Hi, so-and-so. I just want to introduce you to Maggie. You're going to be tutoring her when she comes back next time." And this guy leaned across in his car. He said, "Nothing personal, sweetheart, but I'm fucking not." So that gives you an idea of exactly what I was facing. And I'm, really nervous, really anxious, but I was determined to make a success of it. But that sergeant made my life hell. And it came eventually. I didn't put a grievance in. I was never going to, but eventually I tackled him. And I addressed him in person, and I said, I don't know what's going on, but I want this sorting out. Long story short, it was referred up to the chief super. Chief super heard what was going on, took him away from me, gave me another line manager, and really the rest I just, I sailed through. But because I knew the chief super and he'd recognised my own skills, I was never any good at traffic. You should never put me in, in a riot, because I'm 42-year-old woman, I'm the weak link, aren't I, in that lineup? But I was very good with people. And so immediately, virtually out of my probation, the chief super called me in and asked me to take on board a really high profile job and do the witness protection Force Whitpro were taking on 2 of the family. There was another 5 members. So I joined a major investigation and I relocated 5 people in that family. And I actually never went back to uniform. I became a family liaison officer. I worked on a lot of gang-related shootings and murders. And I had like a little niche that I was really perfect for. And I absolutely loved everything that I did. Paul was working in serious crime. I did do a short period in child protection, but I very quickly realised that as a police officer, you are very much at the mercy of social services. You're not really dealing with the victims. And my strength was always with victims, with vulnerable people, with gaining the trust of people who actually wouldn't even let the police through the door sometimes, if you can imagine.
Just a couple of questions. Did you ever cross paths with that sergeant that treated you that way in the future?
No,
so you've never seen him since?
No, never heard.
I'd love to know what he thinks now.
Me too. I would absolutely bloody love him to get in touch with me. But many of my colleagues from back then have got in touch with me, including one of my trainers from Bruges, who's recently been in touch with me. Said, would you meet up? But you get good and bad everywhere. Every career, every profession has good people and bad people. But when you're a new probationer and you're so much out of your depth, you're relying on people to support you and to encourage you. And I'd never been bullied before in my life, not in that way, but he made my life hell, knowingly, wanting me to walk away. But, I've thought about it many times over the years, Paul. And the only thing that makes any sense to me is that he felt that, he was about the same age as me. And he just thought that, maybe he had the, what do you call it, little man syndrome or something, that he had to have somebody that he could impose his will on. He saw me as a vulnerable victim. And I don't think he ever expected me to fight back.
But actually, it sounds like that is the best thing that you ever did, fight back, because that's exactly what's led, really, to what you're doing today.
You know what? That's why you're dead right, Paul, because nobody would have ever put me in the police. I wouldn't even have put myself in the police. People would have said I should have been a social worker, and maybe I should have been. But I do wonder whether this is why I was put on this earth. I've had 4 children. I care about what's right and what's wrong. I do believe in justice. I do believe in policing. I do believe that we need a strong, qualified, intelligent, capable police force. Capable of you need lots of different skill sets in the police. It's horses for courses. And that's about leadership and it's about management. But you would not have got anybody better than me with vulnerable people or with children. And let's be honest, if you're working on a double gang murder, which, I worked on a lot of murders, if you're going into a community that doesn't trust the police, that won't speak to the police, you do need some people like me that can go and watch Jeremy Kyle. And that, I've been in their situation with my own children. You've got to build those links and you've got to communicate. And I know there will be some of your listeners who don't agree with me, but I believe that communication is key. And so, you do need people who can scrutinize telephones and are brilliant at tech. You need big, strong guys who will go into the riots. But you put me in the middle of, 5 big burly men and you've got somebody charging at you, they're just going to go straight through me that's in the middle.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, there's so much stuff I've done on social media around this because we're still getting a lot of men, actually, that are calling out women for not being good enough for the policing role and things because of the sheer size. But actually, and I'll say it again, I've said it many, many times over the years, some of the best police officers that I've worked with have been women, and I think a big part of that is, they were probably more skilled than me, some of them, but also those communication skills are the biggest tool that any police officer could have above taser, batons, cuffs, vest. Your mouth is the biggest tool.
I fully agree with that, Paul, and I am a massive believer in equality. I believe in equality, But for me, equality doesn't mean that everybody has to do everything. Equality is about having choice. I know what I was good at and I know what I wasn't good at. And recognizing that made me better at the role that I was asked to do. So for me, leadership is about, having the ability to identify people's strengths and use it to the best of their ability. And I know that sometimes you have to do things that you don't necessarily want to do. But common sense is something that has gone out the window with policing. And an
Absolutely.
individual is a resource. And those making the decisions about who to put on a job. I mean, for instance, the Rochdale job that I worked on, that I'm known for, you're dealing on that job with some of the most vulnerable children that you would ever come across from difficult backgrounds. And yet they initially staffed that major investigation with a computer crime unit that they closed. And I'm not being funny, but some of those people in that unit couldn't even speak to people, never mind children, and they didn't want to.
So you've touched on Rochdale there, and that's what I wanted to go on to next, actually. We're seeing a lot in the press. I mean, you're all over the TV, and Rochdale's mentioned, grooming gangs are mentioned, but I think you were right in the middle of an investigation. What was the moment that made you go, this isn't just a really bad case, but it's some sort of cover-up?
Yeah.
Could you just tell us a little bit about how the Rochdale situation came about and what you highlighted?
You know what, Paul? I don't think I can just start straight at Rochdale. I think I have to wind back to 2004 and 5, when I was approached when I was just going into the major crime into the major incident team, and we had a little girl who had been horrendously abused by a gang over a period of years, given an overdose of drugs, and she died. And I was asked to go and join a very small team looking at a job that became known as Operation Augusta. And that was my first introduction, my first knowledge of this crime, which is predominantly Pakistani Muslim men targeting and then raping and passing around and abusing very vulnerable young, mainly white children. That wasn't in Rochdale. That was in Manchester, along the Curry Mile and around the city centre. And I was asked to join a small team to scope whether we had a problem with this kind of crime. I now know that at exactly that time, there was a documentary that was going to be transmitted about the same problem in Keighley, in Bradford, in Yorkshire. The Association of Chief Police Officers had applied and succeeded in having that programme withdrawn because they feared race riots. At the same time as Victoria died, I now believe, with hindsight, that GMP put Augusta together because they feared that when this programme went out, it would become known that Victoria had been abused by the same men, same kind of gangs, and GMP would be asked about it. So they wanted to be able to say, we're having a look at whether we've got a problem, okay? I worked on that job for a year and a half. In that time, we'd identified 97 child rapists. We knew who they were. We had over 3 dozen children that we'd identified, all of those living in care homes, being raped daily. Some had been made pregnant. My husband was terminally ill. I went off work in March, maybe April 2005. That job had gone to the major incident team. We were back record converting all the evidence we'd got, all the names, the numbers, the telephone numbers, and then we were going to be going into live investigation mode. I came back to work after my husband died. That job had been buried. It had died a death. Not one of those men was charged with any kind of sexual offences. A couple of boys were warned under the child abduction warning notices, but the job was buried, and I could not get my head around it. It was horrific, but I was in a very bad place, Paul. Didn't have a single scrap of paper because the job had gone, but it never left me. And I went to senior officers. I tried to get explanations, but I couldn't make any sense of it because I knew that was a very, very serious job where dozens, if not hundreds, of children were being raped.
At what level would that have been buried in terms of the rank within the job?
It was a gold command group that closed it down. And since I started speaking publicly, I never shut up. That job has always been part of my conversation. And subsequently, after I worked on the drama Three Girls, I was the programme consultant. That was transmitted along with a documentary. And Andy Burnham, who was the Police and Crime Commissioner in Manchester, heard me spouting off on Radio 5 Live, actually, saying how corrupt it was, how it was horrendous. And he put together 2 independent reviews at that point, one into Augusta and one into Rochdale. I think, probably thinking I was lying. But the Augusta report reported in January 2020, and every single thing that I had said was proved to be true. But the official finding of that review was that GMP had to reopen that case. It's still running now. Secondly, they reported that that Augusta was closed down because the Gold Command Group made the decision that they would not put resources into it. And that is the official finding. And I want to see people in prison for that, because those 97 men and more, that report identified over 70 children. I was only aware of 36. That none of those senior officers who made that decision have ever given an explanation for that. For me, this is, misconduct in a public office of the highest degree. It's gross criminal neglect.
In effect, they've enabled it.
Absolutely. They've allowed those 97 child rapists to continue for another 15 years. God knows how many other children they have abused in that time. And also the message that goes out is actually, this is okay. So when I'm talking out now about what I've seen, I'm not making it up. I've lived through it. And I know some of those children and how it has impacted their lives forever. And, so when I was approached by the senior officers who behind the Rochdale case I went back to my normal duties when I went back to work. Augusta had closed. I was in the major incident team. I was working predominantly on, murders. I did kidnappings. I did witness protection, but I was in major crime. Didn't work in child protection. But then in 2010, I was called in by some senior officers and said, Maggie, we've got an identical job to Augusta. It's in Rochdale. We've got we know what's been going on, but we've got some victims that we knew about 2 years ago. The first thing is, one of those victims was made pregnant by a 43-year-old married Pakistani Muslim man, father of 3, living in Rochdale. He made this little girl, she was just 13, pregnant. She'd had a termination. She'd got a statement of special educational needs. He'd been abusing her from the age of 12. The fetus had been seized without her knowledge, consent, without a mother's knowledge or consent, I would say unlawfully, when she went for a termination. That fetus had been taken, put in a freezer in the property system and forgotten about. No. There was a routine property review in 2010 and that fetus was discovered. And that's one of the main reasons, I think, why that case was opened. The second reason was that one of the children who had been raped in the kebab shops in Rochdale had been arrested. And this forms kind of the flavour of the drama Three Girls. It's based on the facts, but it is a drama. The girl who'd been arrested, she disclosed all this abuse.
What was she arrested for?
For criminal damage. She smashed up the kebab shop eventually. And the kebab shop owners, or she called the police, she wanted them all arresting for abusing her. Police locked her up for the damage. She eventually disclosed about all the abuse, but they crimed those rapes, but they then shut the job down. But because those rapes were crimed, there was a record there that Rochdale, that abuse was happening. If you wind back to Augusta, none of those rapes had ever been crimed. So when they decided to bury the job and hide it, there was no audit trail. Nobody other than those working on the job like me knew that it existed. So it was easy to hide. With Rochdale, it was very different. So you've got those two factors that I think meant that they couldn't bury it. So I was called in and asked to bring on board the child whose fetus we had, to get her permission and her mum's position. She was still only 14, that we could get DNA, we could prove who got her pregnant, but they wouldn't even let the police through the doors because 2 years earlier, when all this had happened, the older sister, who was 15, who was also being raped by this gang, had actually been arrested on suspicion of being a madam. So she was completely traumatized. So because of my skills with vulnerable people, I was headhunted and asked to come onto that job. Maggie, we need somebody to bring these kids on board, to gain the trust so they will tell us what's happening. And initially I said, I'm not interested. You stick that job. I'm not going back there again. But eventually I thought, you know what? I want these men to go to prison, and I know I can gain the trust of these kids. So I agreed. But I was given policy documents, cast iron guarantees there would not be a repeat of what I'd seen on Augusta. I spent about 9 months, got all the video interviews, took the older girl to ID, the first of 3 ID parades. She picked out 9 of her abusers, got the consent of the little girl to use the fetus for DNA. We knew who the father was. We knew who he was. And then I find out in a conversation on a Friday afternoon, oh, by the way, Maggie, just letting you know, we've changed our mind. We're no longer going to use Amber, but don't get in a strop. We are going to use Ruby in the drama. Ruby was the little girl who got pregnant. But even though we had a fetus, she'd got a statement of special educational needs. She was drunk out of her head every time she was abused. She'd done several video interviews with me. She was prepared to go to court. We had a fetus. We had DNA. Even with all that, the CPS decided to charge that man with conspiracy to commit sexual activity with a child, not rape. Conspiracy to commit sexual activity. He was out of prison in 3 years. And in relation to the older sister,
what was the thinking around the conspiracy rather than the offence itself?
You will have to ask Keir Starmer and Nazir Afzal, I'm afraid. I've got all my own opinions about that. But if you look at the fact that I'd seen a major investigation buried as though it had never happened, and looking at what history will say now, there was a consensus and a determination to play down the magnitude of this kind of sexual offending. And I believe that was a very big part of the decision-making around Rochdale. And at the time, the Rochdale case was lauded as this fantastic example of British justice. It never was, and I said that from the day I resigned. But 10 years later, the new chief constable, Stephen Watson, came in. We'd had the 2 independent reviews that I worked on for 6 years with the review team that Andy Burner had set up. The new chief constable at the press conference went out and he acknowledged publicly that the Rochdale case was borderline incompetent. So I'm not making this up. This is the truth. And it's taken 15 years of my life to prove what I knew to be true 20 years ago. This was not, this was always the truth. So where I am now, I fought. I know I'm whizzing through, but there's so much I could go on forever.
Yeah. So what led to you leaving the place? Because you blew the whistle, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, and it was what I've just been telling you about Amber and Ruby and the fetus and the dropping Amber. The final nail in the coffin was in relation to Amber. Even though they decided that they wouldn't use her as a victim or a witness anymore, they dropped her. Some months later, when the barrister got her head around the whole case, it was very clear that her evidence was needed in court for the trial, because I had a document called Document 29 that was a starting point for a great deal of the Rochdale case, with all the names and the phone numbers of all the abusers. was evidence. So the case had run from that document. A lot of it had anyway. And so when she got her head around it, I'm sure that she must have thought, oh my God, how are we going to get this evidence into court? She's not a victim anymore. We dropped her many months ago. We can't go back to her now. Maggie's walked off the job and we need her evidence. So what they did as a tactical option, and I've got that in writing, they made the tactical decision that they would secretly then portray Amber as one of the gang of paedophiles. But they wouldn't arrest her. They wouldn't caution her. They wouldn't give her a solicitor. In fact, they never told her what was being done. And the only reason that I knew that that was what they did was because I was advised that I must put a grievance in order for this to be publicly and officially recorded. I'd already been, telling everybody who would listen, from the chief constable to the head of serious crime, head of the IPC, the Home Office, the Children's Commissioner. Nobody wanted to hear what I was saying, but I was horrified by what I was seeing. So, but when I got the response to that grievance, it was disclosed in my grievance that in order to get her evidence into court, they'd added her onto the indictment in secret as this older madam who was recruiting children for this gang. And that was never what she was. And in all truth, Paul, even before I went on that job, Amber, because she'd been arrested when she was 15, had been scrutinised. Her case had been scrutinised by the head of the complex case unit in the CPS. And before I was allowed to go anywhere near her, they made the policy decision that she should not have been arrested, that she was just an out-and-out victim. And sometimes I'd worked on cases where we had participating gang members. We'd had gang members who had participated in very serious gun crime. And the CPS had given them protection from immunity from prosecution under SOCPA. I'm only mentioning that because it's police officers who will listen to this. So under all of that, Amber had been scrutinised and had been designated a victim, an out-and-out victim, nothing more. So I was then given permission to spend many months speaking to her and getting her story. Further down the line, when the barrister realises the magnitude of what she'd disclosed and how important she was, the only way to get her evidence into court was to add her to the indictment. But any lawyer worth their salt would have taken this authority from the head of the complex case unit. The CPS said, well, nothing's happened in that period of time. How come she was a victim here and identified as the most important victim on Rochdale, and suddenly now she's an abuser? It just wouldn't add up. So they couldn't tell the lawyer. So that's what they did. But they didn't tell Amber. She didn't know. And when she was in hospital, about to give birth to her second child, the social services came in and they told the hospital that there was a court order out and that she was not allowed to take her baby home because she was a convicted she wasn't convicted because she was never charged, but that she was a paedophile and that child would be at risk. There was no paperwork. There was no court documents. Her baby was tagged in the hospital. She wasn't allowed to leave. And it was at almost exactly that time that I resigned and I went back and I told Amber what was going on. And then she told me what had happened to the baby. I took her to a lawyer, and that's where my fight for justice for them started. And it took 10 years to clear her name. But then, it was acknowledged that she'd been, and now she's formally acknowledged as a victim. Her rapes are crime. She has been, I took her to an apology from the chief constable and I supported her. But when you've seen that kind of horror, Paul, it undermines everything you believe about justice and about what the police are there for. Who is making these decisions? This is not about equality. The law says that any man who rapes a 12-year-old child is a paedophile.
Do you think some of this decision making's come from the establishment, government?
believe it all has.
Okay.
But I don't blame the people on the ground. For me, this came from the Home Office. Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions on the Rochdale case, so I will never accept that he wasn't complicit in all these decisions.
Have you ever had a conversation with Keir Starmer?
Oh
about
no,
this?
no, I don't think he'd want
Would
to
you
talk.
would you like a conversation with Keir
Absolutely,
Starmer?
but he knows exactly the conversation he'd get, so he's never going to invite me, is he? But he knows what I'm saying anyway. I mean, last year I was very vocal, and I think I just put a tweet on Twitter. It ended up all over the front pages. I think it was the Mail on Sunday or something. He knows exactly what I think of him, and I don't censor my words. I don't defame him, but I believe fully that he was behind all those charging decisions. I do believe that victims of crime get a raw deal anyway. Victims of sexual crime, only it's less than 2% of every reported rape that ever reaches court. They're the official statistics. That doesn't account for all the thousands and thousands of victims that don't report it, because they know that the system will make their journey even more traumatic. And in my charity now, we are supporting victims who are trapped in a system that actually really doesn't care about them. And then that's
in regards to Rochdale, then, where are we at in terms of prosecutions and things?
They're still dribbling along. I mean, Augusta was reopened in 2019, and we are 6 years on. And my charity is supporting some of the victims of Augusta that I never met in 2005, but have now subsequently come to my charity for help. They're still waiting for their abusers to be charged. That's 20 years of their life. Even this new investigation has been 6 years. They're not having an opportunity to live a life. They're at the mercy of a system that drags its feet, that isn't fit for purpose. It's not fit for purpose. And we really need to be completely overhauling. I'm not blaming individual police officers. I'm blaming the decision makers. Now, as a country, we are not a third world country. But I have travelled a lot, and I see better criminal justice systems in countries, that we consider to be way below us.
Do you think a change in government is going to speed this up?
No, because I've seen the corruption from the Conservatives, from Labour. This isn't a party political point. The thing that I have learned is that, you might get the change of faces in government, Rishi Sunak as opposed to Keir Starmer. The reality is, though, that all those men in grey suits in the Home Office, in the back rooms, they don't change. So the policies, they can, spout off about new policies. But look at how many U-turns we've had this year. Look at this so-called, I work very closely with Baroness Casey for the Casey audit last summer. She is one of the few people that I have, that I do, and I hope she never lets me down, but I have trusted, because her report reflected what I believed, and I took a group of survivors from all over the country to speak to her. But what I have learned is that politicians of all political persuasions tell lies. They are career politicians. They have not got the integrity. They're not driven by their beliefs or by integrity or by, I think one of the lessons I've learned, and it sounds really cynical, and I hate to feel this way, but other than very, very rare exceptions, my opinion is that it doesn't just have to be a police officer, but for a police, we all swear the same oath of attestation, to uphold fundamental human rights, to protect the vulnerable, to act according to the law. Every police officer makes that promise. So when I am trying desperately to get action taken about Rochdale, because I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing, I'm told that senior officers make decisions, Maggie, and if you can't do as you're told, maybe you're in the wrong job. Now, I didn't promise to do as I was told. I promised to uphold the law. And if this had been theft from a motor vehicle and they said, let it go, I probably would have let it go. But seeing thousands of children having their lives destroyed while those sitting at the top were turning a blind eye, I could never have lived with myself. So I went to everybody, including this. Peter Fye was the chief constable. I unburdened my heart in an email. I wanted to go and speak to him because I didn't believe he knew what was going on back then, Paul. I know completely now. He and all other chief constables knew full well what was going on, and they made the decision that they were going to turn away, that they were going to cover it up, that they were going to pretend it wasn't happening. I rattled their cages, but I lost everything to do it. I lost my career and my income and my home and my job, my life, my mental health at one point. But what I have learned over the years is that I do not believe that anybody gets to the post of chief constable or, assistant chief constable or head of social services or a member of the cabinet without being faced with stark choices. You either protect the organisation or you listen to your conscience. And if you're the person that listens to your conscience, you will never get past a certain rank. And that, for me, is a major problem. And it's the same in government. If you are somebody who goes into politics because you truly believe in truth, in justice, in helping those who are less able to help themselves than we are, if you really believe those things and you put those principles above your loyalty to a party or the whip, you will never get in the cabinet. You have got to be able to do as you're told if you go higher up the ranks. And it's the same in the police. And I don't know. So when you say if it was a different government, would it be any different? No, it wouldn't, because I've met and I've had conversations with Rishi Sunak, Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, Jess Phillips. You wouldn't even say hello to me. And I'm not doing this to make friends. I am doing it because, and the other thing I would say, Paul, is that when I started my charity, I made the decision on day one that, the Maggie Oliver Foundation will not take a penny from commissioned money, because I would rather we don't exist than have to compromise that truth. We are representing so many victims who have been trampled all over, who have been dismissed and blamed and criminalized. And I don't want their money in order for me to have to sanitize the message so that one of my team doesn't lose their job. The truth is so important. And I do live in hope that we will change things. I think what we have now since I began speaking out, which was in 2013, I resigned in 2012, we do have awareness. The country is aware.
Something I do want to touch on is you've just briefly spoken about it there. You're obviously very passionate, very honest about this whole situation. But I want to talk about some of the personal cost to you having been outspoken. So we already know you blew the whistle on what was going on Rochdale. Essentially, that cost you your job.
Yeah.
How else has it affected you personally?
It's completely changed my life. The second time I saw this neglect was like the summer of 2011. And I could not I was very naive. I'm not now, but I was then. Originally, I thought it was a lazy officer. That was not the truth. He was lazy, and he was somebody that I wouldn't pay him peanuts. But that wasn't the bigger picture. And I tried for 18 months whilst a serving police officer to be heard. But I've got 4 children of my own, Paul. And I joined the police to do good, not to trample over desperate children who needed and deserved protecting by the public services whose duty it is to protect. So when I've been through all the ranks and, as I said, the IOPC, the Children's Commissioner, and I realised nobody was going to listen. I went to the Federation. They introduced me to a lawyer. And then the Federation withdrew their support for me because I wouldn't give all my evidence to the 4 solicitors Well, by that time, the force had made it very clear to me that they were going to do nothing. So there is no way they are having my bleep paperwork, because I am not going away from this. And I realised that I was on my own. And I either, one of my senior officers said to me, Maggie, look, as I said to you, senior officers make decisions. As a junior officer, you do as you're told. She said, put this out of your mind. Come to work, put your bum on a seat, take your wages and go home. But you know what? I couldn't do that because I was ashamed of my part in gaining the trust of those vulnerable children, only to cast them aside because it no longer suited. And I sat at home on my own, Paul, for a couple of months because I was actually threatened with prison. I was told that if I went public, that everything I knew was only because I was a police officer. And you sign...
Who made those threats?
A very, very senior police officer. Right. When I was telling him what I'd seen. And I made it very clear that this time I am not going away. On Augusta, I couldn't prove what I knew. This time, I am not letting this go. And I, you can see how animated I get. And I am honest, and I don't tiptoe around. I'm fairly direct. And he said to me, Maggie, you need to be very, very careful what you say. You as a police officer, you are not able to share this publicly. And he put this in writing as well. And the fear was that I would go to prison if I went public. And I tried to get reassurance from the Federation that, because somebody mentioned to me, you can make a protected disclosure in the public interest. I'd never even heard of that. But the Federation absolutely blew the stack and said, if you think we're going to help you to do this, you're barking up the wrong tree. So I was completely on my own. But I sat at home, and what was going on the TV back then was all the Hillsborough thing coming into a public arena. And I always mention this because, I remember Hillsborough, and I remember those victims being blamed for their own situation, that they were drunk, that they were yobs, that they brought it on themselves. That was never the truth. Bad decisions were made that caused that tragedy. But the families of those victims had spent all their lives fighting for their loved ones' names to be cleared, for justice. And with having 4 children of my own, I always believed that the truth would eventually come out. But I didn't want my kids to be sitting there in, 20, 30 years' time when all this hits the TV and they will be saying, well, my mum worked on those jobs. Why did she not say anything? And so I just decided that I was going to tell the truth. I recognised that if I didn't resign, I think they would have found something eventually that would have tried to discredit me. They would have stuck me in some dead-end job in a back office, and they would have fabricated some complaint, and they would have got rid of me under a misconduct thing. And I decided that I am going to go public. I am going to step away from an organisation and leadership that I no longer believe in, and I am going to tell the truth. And wherever that leads, I accepted. I kind of faced my worst fears, and I accepted that what will be will be. But if they charge me and take me to court, I will tell the whole truth about what I've seen, and I will raise the awareness of what those entrusted to protect children are capable of doing and what they are doing. But I resigned in October 2012, and I worked for 3 months on a documentary that went out on File on 4 in March 2013. But I also included some of the Rochdale victims that I had been working with. They shared their stories in that documentary, and they corroborated what I was saying. And when that documentary went out, it was probably the best decision I ever made. But in that, and it was out there then. So, but what happened, Paul, was when I resigned, my husband had died, so I'm a single parent. I was responsible on my own for paying my mortgage, for, looking after myself. So I lost my income. I was in a family home that I'd been in for 20, maybe 30 years.
How did you manage financially?
With great difficulty, with very, very great difficulty. I ended up having to move out of the family home I'd been in for 3 years. I thought I'd end up working in, Marks and Spencer's or in a shop. I moved into a little apartment. I took in a lodger. I actually did get a small pension because I'd got 16 years in the police, and I was over 55. So I got a small pension. So I was sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul in a way. And really that's how I existed. I started to spend time abroad because I could live there for cheaper on a shoestring, really. But the subject never left me. I once that documentary went out, I was very shortly afterwards approached by the team behind the drama Three Girls. I worked on that for 4 years. I can't even count how many interviews I did. But when I first, and I was expecting the police to come and knock on my door. And in fact, when the documentary went out in March 2013, I decided that I was not going to sit at home and wait for someone to come and knock on my door. So I disappeared to India, and I thought, if they're going to come after me, they're going to have to find me first, and I will make sure that everybody knows the truth of what I'm saying. So it almost destroyed me, because what I couldn't understand, Paul, there was a time when I was thinking, am I losing my marbles here? Why is it only me? Where are all the other police officers who are seeing what I'm seeing and think it's okay? But
the thing is that a lot of them probably didn't think it was okay, but they were looking after their own interests and not the interests of those girls.
And I know, and
Yeah.
I see that, and I understand. I understand why it's terrifying. I understand the sacrifices you have to make in order to speak like I did, because I made them. And what is wrong is that I had to do that. There should be a safe place for people. I didn't want to cause trouble. I honestly believe that the chief constable didn't know what was happening in that job. I know now, of course he knew, as did, everybody, all these, all the chief police officers knew. The Home Office knew, the CPS knew. It was a deliberate attempt to cover up the truth, because I think 3 things: the ethnicity of the culture of the abusers, the fact that these children are very damaged. They either come from Augusta, all the children were living in care, and actually living in care is one of the worst things that can happen to any child, because nobody cares for them. And the third thing, all Rochdale were difficult backgrounds. The children were maybe living in either broken homes, or there'd been bereavement, or there was drug problems. So those children needed more protection. And the third element is undoubtedly prioritising resources. And these kids were judged as not being worth protecting. But I always say, if this was Boris Johnson's daughter or Keir Starmer's daughter, would you think it's okay for a 43-year-old man who got your 13-year-old child with special needs pregnant to be charged with conspiracy to commit sexual activity with a child and walk free back in the streets of Rochdale 3 years later? And I would bet my life on it that they would not accept that. So this is about, double standards. And I felt a duty and an obligation to fight for those children who don't have a voice. And now, over the last 10 years, as I've spoken out more, and the drama did an amazing job in explaining grooming gangs, but the public have been educated. And now it's a lot, we still need a lot of change, but it's a lot harder to blame those children. And the public, I believe, completely get that this is wrong. Those at the top of these organisations and the government are still wriggling because they actually don't really want to do anything. They're not easy cases to investigate. They are really complex and they're very time consuming. And the other thing to say, Paul, is that policing is on its knees. officers don't stay beyond 5 years. And a 5-year career for a 21-year-old, they're not equipped to handle these complex cases. You've lost your career detectives. You've lost all that experience. The pay in the police is inadequate for the job you're being asked to do. The pensions, why is somebody going to put their life into a career where they can almost get as much in McDonald's? We really need an overhaul of the whole system. The courts are on the knees, and it's nothing to do with juries. It's because, courtrooms are sitting empty because the government won't finance the people needed to open up those courtrooms and put the judges in them. It's nothing to do with juries. So
you talked earlier about the threats that you received from that senior cop about potentially going to prison if you told the truth effectively.
And I've got that in writing.
When you left the job. Have you faced any other threats whilst you've been out of the job? Intimidation and confrontation, given the result of your campaigning?
A lot of confrontation from police, senior police. I mean, the former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, Ian Hopkins, he hated me with a vengeance. Wouldn't even come to a press conference after the Augusta report was published. It was a live press conference. He had his in his own little building. But he told his staff, and I've seen the letters, and he told victims that they shouldn't engage with the Maggie Oliver Foundation. Well, the reason was because he knows that we will not let him off the hook. That's changed. We do have my charity. We are building bridges with police forces. There are good people in the police. And if you get those good people, these cases, which are horrific, we can help them to be resolved and avoid complaints or avoid them going really, really nasty. But the value of the foundation is that we're not funded by them. So we always take these cases, we go to like regular meetings and we'll highlight the worst cases we're dealing with, current cases, not historical cases. And if there is a dialogue and there is a willingness to work together and work with the victim, they can be resolved. But if we hit a brick wall, ultimately we will go to the media. And it is usually at that point that the police forces and the senior officers sit up and think, shit, we're going to have to do something. And for instance, with the Baird review in Manchester, which was two years ago now, my charity spotted a pattern where vulnerable victims who were daring to challenge the police were being unlawfully arrested, unlawfully strip searched, intimidated in order to silence them. And we picked up on a pattern.
Arrested for what?
Malicious communications, or on one occasion, because what this victim clearly had evidence in her phone. She'd been complaining for many months, falling on deaf ears, and our view was that they'd arrested her so they could seize her phone and get the evidence off the phone and delete it, right? So when we spotted this pattern, we raised it within the force. We raised it with Police and Crime Commissioner, with Andy Burnham. And when we got nowhere, we went to Sky. They did a big expose, and then Burnham announced this Baird review. And in the end, 7 of our victims were included in that report. And even Vera Baird said that their treatment had been barbaric. So our value is that we are truly independent. But I always say, I am not the enemy. Actually, we are trying to work with police forces to help them to ensure that these cases are handled properly. So you get good and bad officers. Sometimes it's an officer who's out of their depth, who doesn't have the support, who hasn't had the training. And actually, if you have a conversation and you look at, senior officer then approaches that officer to find out what is going on and gives support, it can be resolved. But if they're not willing to do that, then we're not going to go away. So I think that is a very unique position to be in. But I do think that a lot of the work we do probably should be taken out of the hands of the police, because they don't have enough resources to properly support victims and update them and ring them and all of that. That's another skill, leave police to do the policing.
Can you go through exactly what the foundation does?
Yeah, we've got like 3 pillars, I always say. We've got emotional support. So a victim, an adult survivor of any kind of sexual violence. So it could be a man, it could be a woman, it could be somebody who was abused 50 years ago, who wants somebody who will be non-judgmental, supportive, fully trained to talk to. That's the emotional support side. And they can self-refer through our website, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, and they will be matched up with one of our ambassadors, many of whom are survivors, and they will get one call every week to talk about whatever they want. It's a 12-week course, and then they can have another 12 weeks, and then we will pay for them to do group therapy. We're hoping to introduce one-to-one therapy. The other side is an advocacy side. So somebody who is currently got an ongoing case, a live investigation for any kind of sexual abuse, that feels that they are hitting a brick wall, or they are not being heard, or something hasn't been done, or it's being covered up. They can self-refer to us, and we have an advocacy team that will support, help, guide to help their case be progressed. That side will also help victims to access criminal injury compensation, or to take action against the police sometimes, or will signpost to somebody who can help them take action against social services if they've been failed as a child. In the middle, I call it force for change work. Rather than campaigning, it's force for change. So I use those stories and my experience to raise awareness. You know, we were very centrally involved in the Casey audit. We are going to be helping survivors to have their voices heard in this new inquiry. We are leading on a judicial review against the government to try to force them to implement the 20 recommendations of ICS. So I'm spreading awareness on behalf of many of the victims who want to remain anonymous, but want their stories to be heard. But we also help victims who do want to be heard to have a platform to speak, and help them to recover, to become empowered. Our motto is transforming pain into power. So, you know, a young girl, some of your listeners will have heard her. I took her on a podcast, Trigonometry.
Is this Jade?
Yeah, young Jen.
Yeah, I was going to speak to you about Jade, actually, because I wouldn't mind getting her on this podcast.
Okay.
But I'll speak to you about that later.
Well, actually, you know, Jade, when Jade first came to me, she contacted me through my social media. She'd watched 3 girls and she identified with Amber. And I met her in Euston Station, and she was completely, about 3 years ago, completely broken, to the point that she could barely speak, and she was physically shaking. And we spoke, and then I said, look, come to the foundation. One of our team will support you emotionally and help you process all your pain. And that started that journey. And she's had several cycles of help with the same ambassador, which is our unique selling point. You know, they build a trusted relationship, and she began to realize that, you know, she did nothing wrong. She was a child that was failed, and yet she'd been blamed and criminalized and gone to prison when she never should have been treated that way. And then we were working on a documentary for Channel 4. It's called Groomed, a National Scandal. And so Jade was one of the 3 young women that we support that I took along to meet Anna Hall, who made the documentary. And so we worked very closely for 2.5 years. At the end of that, Jade now feels empowered. She accepts that it's not her fault. So I then took her on Trigonometry to tell her story. And last week, for the very first time on Saturday, I took her with me to a live speaking engagement. And, you know, she got very upset.
What was the engagement for?
Well, I was asked to go and speak it was a speakers conference. So the person before me speaking was Jeremy Corbyn, and then there was Sir Ed Davey, and there was there in Dale. It was a whole weekend of speakers. And I've written my book, Survivor. So I was asked to go and speak about my journey and do a book signing. And I said, maybe I could bring Jade along with me, because I'm very protective of the young women as they begin to find their own feet anyway. And Jade had never done this before. So we stayed overnight, and I did my bit. And then I brought Jade onto the stage and we spoke together, and she got very emotional, but she did incredibly well. And what the organisers said was that in 14 years, we got 2 standing ovations. In the 14 years since they started this weekend festival, they have never seen a response like it. So that for me is transforming pain into power. Making a survivor realise that this is the system that has failed them so monumentally, that their lives have been virtually destroyed, but that they can recover, that with help they can find their voice.
But not only in doing that, they're helping others.
Absolutely, and that's
by doing exactly the same and speaking out.
And she is proud, and I'm possibly taking her to an international event in April in Italy. So we will do several. And at that event, there are many international bodies there from, the United Nations, from all over, because I want the world to hear these stories and I want change to come. But I couldn't do this, Paul, with a clear conscience, feeling that the victims, either who need emotionally helping or need help navigating a system, I want to make sure that they have somewhere to go. So that's why I've been building a team, an amazing team within my charity of people who share my beliefs and passion and fight for children and are passionate about the work they do. And it's nothing to do with money or position. It's about bringing change and helping individuals to feel less alone.
What's the ultimate goal for you?
To change the system, to have every child protected. When a police officer goes to a child who goes missing from home every weekend, don't see them as trouble. See them as a vulnerable child. Ask the question, why? If you find a child walking on the middle of the moors with no coat on and no shoes, don't pick them up and drop them back at their care home or in a family setting and give them a ticking off. Ask why. I want accountability. That's a big thing for me, of those people like that Gold Command group on Augusta who cast all those children to the wind. And if chief constables believe there is even the remotest chance that they might end up in a criminal court, I can guarantee that they will make different decisions moving forward. And leadership is leading from the front. And if they make it very clear that ignoring these children, that doing half a job is not acceptable, that message will filter down and the systems will change. But I also want to see better conditions for police. I want to see recruiting police officers who are going to have a career in there, that are not just in and out the door to put it on the CV, because that's what's happening, as you know. We need to value our important public services, and policing is one of the most important. I want to see the courts working properly. I want to see victims being heard. I actually want to see we support those victims who come to us to make sure they're not alone in fighting a system that doesn't want to hear them. And I do believe that the third sector really could be utilised really much more widely by policing, and free policing up to do what they are meant to do. As it is now, victims are bottom of the pile. They don't get updates. They're picked up at the beginning when they're needed to give a video interview, and then they drop like a ton of bricks often until they're needed for court. And right now that can be 5 years. And they're being told so much nonsense. You can't get therapy. You can't talk about what's happened. That's bullshit. You can. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so I want to see change. I want to see heads roll. I want to see some senior public officials in prison for deliberate neglect of duty, for putting money above lives. I want to see change, really, and I want to see kids have a proper crack of the whip.
You've talked briefly there about what the police can do, certainly on the front line, asking more questions of young people. If they are picked up in remote areas or they're upset or whatever it might be, don't just return them home without asking a lot of questions. What else can
but for me,
frontline cops do? I mean, we've talked about updating people regularly. That is a problem. I've experienced that issue personally, where, I mean, the police are meant to adhere to the Victims Code of Practice. Often they don't, and they don't update enough.
Communication.
Anything else?
Well, communication is key. And, effective communication can prevent so much harm. And people are human. They accept mistakes are made, but, we should be using technology much better. Don't deliver an NSA decision to a vulnerable victim at 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon when there is nobody for that person to talk to. Now, we raise that we're a national charity, by the way. We're not just in the Northwest, but we raised that with GMP, and they committed not to do that anymore. That, for me, is a little bit of progress, providing it follows through to every officer knows. I think communication is key. I think a big problem for me as well is inadequate policing systems. Every police force has a standalone system that doesn't speak to each other. So if you get somebody who offends in Lancashire, and then that abuser goes to Yorkshire or goes to Manchester, the intelligence systems don't speak to each other. And all those years ago, when Ian Huntley killed Jessica and Holly in Huntingdon, that report's highlighted that was a major problem and why he was allowed to go from Geordieland down there and nobody knew that he was a risk. We still have not resolved that problem. It still happens today. These child abduction warning notices are not worth the paper they're written on, and they're used as a way of getting rid of serious sexual offending, in my opinion. And again, that's recorded on a local intelligence system. So more police officers I would like to see more police officers who have experienced life, because I think if you're 20 years old and you've never lived away from home and you've not got life experience, you are not as equipped to spot these problems as you are if you're a bit older. Leadership and putting the right officers in the right positions and giving them the time to do the job that often they want to do. But you're a resource as a police officer. So much comes from the top, In
regards to the foundation, do you offer any sort of in-house police training?
Well, we would like to. I mean, I had a meeting with one of the assistant chief constables 2 weeks ago. With some of them now, I have quarterly meetings. And that was one of the suggestions that I made, that, maybe once a year or twice a year, we take maybe a couple of survivors into that police force, and not just, new recruits. Bring in those people at the top who are disconnected from what's going on at the bottom. Let them hear the human consequence of their neglect. And I can guarantee that if they hear some of those stories, like Jade, like Chantel, like many of those who want to be heard, they will never see this in the same light again, and they will make changes. So yes, absolutely. That's an area that we really are wanting to expand, to educate and there shouldn't be a them and us. If you don't see a child who's being raped brutally as somebody that you should help as a police officer, even if it's inconvenient, you shouldn't be a police officer, in my opinion. That they are the jobs that matter. And I said to the Chief Constable, Stephen Watson, he was sort of promoting, saying how fantastic it was that there'd been more arrests, right? My opinion is the number of arrests doesn't matter. If you're going to lock somebody up for putting a naughty post on Facebook because you're going to get a tick in a box for doing one arrest, you are going to be pushing officers to do those easy arrests. If you've got a girl who's been raped over a period of years and you still only get one tick in a box for that case, there is no incentive there to focus on this serious crime. And I've seen that on Augusta, because back in 2005, police forces were being measured on acquisitive crime. So, if you had a report of somebody pinching your radio out the car, you'd have every bloody uniform officer on the division charged to that job.
I mean, I remember when I was in the job and they'd pull up like little league tables of all 4 or 5 shifts at the station, saying, "Oh, you need more stop and searches, you need more
bullshit.
arrests."
Total bullshit.
Yeah.
Total bullshit. We had one guy who would sit at 5 o'clock in the morning on the Curry Mile where there were double yellow lines at traffic lights, and he'd do a producer. He'd summons everybody because you'd get ticks in boxes. I didn't join the police to put a tick in the box. If it's a tick in a box for locking somebody up, for calling somebody whatever they want to call them on Facebook, I believe in freedom of speech as well. I actually do. We shouldn't be filling the prisons up with people who are putting something online. And then you've got a child rapist who pretty much gets a slap on the wrist if he's very, very, very unlucky. We are measuring the wrong things. We need to this shouldn't be about counting numbers. It should be about changing lives. And individual officers, I believe, when they join the job, join for that reason. But those good intentions are often drummed out of them because they're not supported in those complex cases. They're not given the time. So we need more resources. We need more police. We need better training, better experienced people going into the police. Salaries that reflect the importance of that job. Pension.
But also, I think the salary attracts the type of person as well.
Yeah, I think the two are connected. So, if you're going to be a doctor, I think it's about attracting the right people who are going to stay in that career as a career. It's not something you learn in 5 minutes. And, I've never promoted myself as the best detective on the block. I never was. I wasn't by any means the best at suspect interviews. But in certain things, I was the best. And it was about using my skills and qualities so that the force and the public got the best out of me. So we need to change the way decisions are made. And that's got to come from the top. But from my experience now of the last 20 years, I see people at the top of policing as being more interested in doing the bidding of the government, of a political mouthpiece. And, I would like to see them saying, we don't have enough officers with more money. These are the problems. Instead of, being told to jump and they ask how high. I really feel it's a major problem in the UK and it needs to be.
We've talked about quite a lot of serious issues here, but before we wrap up, I want to know about any funny or outrageous stories from your days in the police that remind you of the human side of the job.
There's quite a lot, really. I mean, the easy ones, when I joined the cops, as you can see, I've got my makeup on. I could do with washing my hair now. But I remember turning up, having my makeup on, and being told, you can't go out with all that muck on your face. Oh, yes, I am. I'm, don't go anywhere without my makeup. I'm being told, oh, it rains, it'll all run down your face. And it's all right, it's waterproof. And I did stick to my guns, Same with my shoes. I hate flat shoes. All my friends will tell you that I just don't do flat shoes. So I went from shoes like this and eventually ended up in Doc Martens. But it was challenging. My identity was always important. What else? Yeah.
Any pranks?
We did actually, yeah. I remember one incident I went to. I think it was my first ever. I was still in uniform and I was sent to a house with the lad I was teamed up with in a van. We were teamed up together. And one of the neighbours had seen all bottles of milk on the doorstep and posting. And so we were sent because it was a concern for welfare. This guy I was with, I don't like dead bodies, but he was even worse than me. And we pulled up in the street And I got out the van for us both to go in. And then he said, oh, a job's just come in. And he tore off and left me to go in the dark on my own, like feeling around the light switch, and found this little old lady who had had a heart attack and died in front of the fire. And I mean, it's a bit gruesome, but sort of had melted quite a lot.
Oh.
So the whole team were a bit, horrified about what he'd done. So the following shift, when we were on nights, he went in to take a crime report. And when he came out, one of the lads in our team had got the spare keys and gone and moved his van. He came out. And
bit of payback.
And he had to shout over the radio, excuse, number to, I think someone's stolen the van. They had to go into that. And we were all sitting there in the parade room, and we took the piss out of it. That was hilarious. Another time we had a fantastic guy, he might even be listening to this, who was our dog man. And he was...
You give him a shout out?
Bob, we used to call him Bob the dog. And he used to come in on parade sometimes, dressed up in all kind of weird and wonderful outfits that probably wouldn't be acceptable today.
What sort of stuff would he wear?
Well, I remember one night him coming in dressed up as one of the singers out of YMCA. So, we had there was a lot of laughs. We did, I loved the job that I did, and being part of that, team life. Well, now with my charity, we've got a great team, but actually being in the thick of those kind of jobs for, where some of them are life or death situations. I remember I could never run, and I still can't, but I remember going to actually a theft from motor vehicle or thieves on at a car in this place in Manchester that was all dark. And anybody who worked in Hume, we worked in Moss Side and Hume, there was this old dark deserted church in this creepy graveyard, and there'd been an incident there before I joined where they found all these sacrifices, in this church. And I remember the lad that I was with, Alan, he took off after this guy who was trying to break in the car. I couldn't keep up. He threw himself over a wall, and I ended up shouting up for help. And I remember them saying, where are you? And I said, I'm here. And it was a bit of, everybody just took the piss out of me. Are you there? So we did have a lot of fun. I couldn't drive the big vans very well, so we had a tiny little yard out back, and it would take me about half an hour to back a van into a tiny space, and there'd be all the lads to be out the front watching, and visits to licensed premises where you go in in your uniform and being asked if you were a stripper and all of this. They were all good memories. There was and actually you have to have that when you're working in such a dark environment. But
see, as much as it's changed a lot, it is a job like no other.
It really is. And, I've no regrets about going in. It changed my life, Paul, completely. But where would I have been if I hadn't taken that step? It added so much learning, life experience. It opened my eyes. The only thing I regret was that I had to resign to speak the truth. And I actually shouldn't have had to do that. I actually was trying to do the job a favour because I truly believed it was a lazy officer. I didn't realise that I was taking on such an enormous... It wasn't just one institution. It was every public institution.
Well, it's the establishment.
The establishment. And I was one lone voice, one lone woman. And I thought I would do one interview and then that would be it. But I'd probably finish on this, and it might have been that would have been the last you'd heard of me. But after my documentary went out, the File on 4 documentary, the chief constable at the time, Peter Foy, who had refused to meet me ever, I've never met him and spoken to him to this day, he was given a right of reply, and it hit it was everywhere after it went out. It was quite a big news story. And I'm sitting in India and I'm listening to him with his right of reply, not on File on 4, but it was either Woman's Hour or the Today programme. And I remember him very clearly saying, he called me Margaret. I've met Margaret on many occasions. Unfortunately, she is an officer who became too emotionally involved. She'd been bereaved, but this case was handled properly. And I sat there, and I am going to swear now because I swear every time, because it enraged me. And I thought, how fucking dare you? This wasn't a victim that came to me on my own investigation. I was headhunted, and I was tasked with bringing those children into a major investigation because we knew what they'd lived through. And you gave cast iron guarantees that if they told us what had gone on, that we and I would be allowed to support them all the way through to trial. And then you changed your mind. So how dare you?
Yeah, that's deflection.
Yeah, and it fired me up because it was a personal insult. And I value my reputation, my integrity. If I give my word, I honour that. And so him trying to discredit me whilst knowing all these children were being raped. And the other thing that he then went on to say was that he is a good Christian man and he's the father of 3 children. And I thought, well, you know what? Hang your head in shame.
If it happened to his kids,
so
he'd be dealing with things a little bit differently.
Yeah, so all those, I think you've got a fairly good flavour of what I'm like. But I do wear my heart on my sleeves. I've tried my best to put right the wrong that I saw.
Who would you like to sit in a room with and have these difficult conversations? 3 people. There's got to be 3 people out there where you think, I'd love to sit in a room with you and I'd love half an hour with you to explain all of this and see exactly what you got to say.
Elon Musk, probably. Right? Because his platform actually opened this up last year. Whatever you think of him, I did 50 interviews last January. So he has got a national platform. I'd like to take, some survivors that we support to sit down with. Half an hour wouldn't be enough. Probably him. There'd be no point speaking to Keir Starmer. He was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and if he's not done anything...
Yeah, but would you?
Well,
if he opened up an invite, would you get in a room with him, speak to him for half an hour about this? If he was open
I
to
would
it?
talk to anybody, so absolutely not a problem at all.
Yeah, so we've got Musk, Starmer, anybody else?
Oh, God.
Or anybody that you just want to shake?
There's a lot of them.
Listen.
I mean, I've spoken to so many people. Musk, Starmer, and God, the King.
Yeah.
Why not? Go to the top.
Yeah.
Maybe he's never heard these stories first. The problem is that I've heard people so often talk the talk and be shocked and say how horrendous it is and give promises that they're going to go away and do something, and then they don't. So I always say I hope for the best, expect the worst, but I will never stop speaking that truth. And each time somebody listens, somebody then, spreads the word. Somebody will, donate to the charity because we are run on public donations, or they'll go to the website. And they use their voice in the conversations they ain't going to. So I'm trying to build an army, really, of like-minded people, because I truly believe that the only way we will see change is people power. I don't think they'll top act unless they see that they've got no alternative.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Probably that I tried. You
told the truth?
Yeah, I've spoken the truth. I've tried my best and I've raised awareness. And I think the other part, I've built a charity that will continue that work with people who care like I do for long, long into the future, so that no victim or survivor will have to travel this journey completely on their own. That's really, and actually that my own children are proud of me. And they've learned that you stand up for what you believe in, and that actually one voice can make a huge difference. That's probably, if I get, remembered for those things, I think I'll have made my mark. So that's all I can do.
Where can people find you?
Well, I'm on, somebody hacked my Facebook page. Some somebody in Thailand and Indonesia, so don't go there because it's not me. But on my LinkedIn, Maggie Oliver UK, X, Maggie Oliver UK, or the foundation, www.themaggieoliverfoundation.com. We're there to help. You can share your story. If you put me online, you'll get all sorts. It's Maggie Oliver, and my socials are Maggie Oliver UK. So, and if anybody needs help, you can self-refer. If you want to donate, please go to our website. We have an annual ball. Get in touch with us if you want to come along. But yeah, support us, spread the word, fight for change. And I would say try and be brave if you are faced with something that is so wrong that we need awareness of it. And I know it's not easy and not everybody can do that, but I guess some of us have to sometimes.
Yeah, I'll add all the links as well to the podcast listing on YouTube and all the audio platforms. As well, for coming on the podcast, massive thank you. It's been really, really insightful.
My pleasure.
And I've no doubt that this episode is going to help people as well.
I hope so.
It'll help cops, help survivors potentially as well, because we've got a whole array of people that listen. And as a thank you for coming on the podcast, you get yourself a Pocket Circle podcast mug.
Amazing.
So please message me a suitable address to send it across to.
Amazing. That's brilliant. And welcome the opportunity to speak to ex-colleagues. And, there's a lot of good people in the police. And I think many of those good people are being stifled and are very disillusioned with the way the job has gone. So, we're there for you as well to share the load sometimes. I'm often contacted actually by serving police officers who are facing similar crisis of conscience, if you like, asking where do they go, what can they do. I still don't have an easy answer, if I'm honest. If you want to keep your job, you can speak to somebody, but if no action is taken, I really don't know what else you can do other than resign. And I'm very fortunate that I did get a platform and I have been heard, but that's not always the case either. So,
but you've done that.
I've been lucky. I've been very lucky, and I've tried my best. That's all any of us can do, really. But thank you, Paul. I really enjoyed it.
No, thank you, and we'll catch up soon.
Okay. All right, Paul. Lovely to meet you.